Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brandon Hill. I'm the Marketing Director here at Passenger, and I'll be your moderator for the session today. We're very excited to have you here for today's webinar on the problem with today's voice customer programs. But before we get into introductions and the presentation, a couple of housekeeping tasks. The first is, yes, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. The second is to please submit your questions into the Q&A panel. We're collecting those, and as you're probably all very familiar, we'll have a Q&A session at the end where we'll get to those. In terms of timing, I can assure you that you will not miss your next meeting. We're probably looking at about 45 minutes for today's webinar. So rest assured you have time for coffee or a quick snack break before your next round of meetings. Spent most of his career in the market research industry, working closely with clients and operations teams to ensure client needs are met. He has published articles on market research methods and delivered presentations at the MRA, PAYPOR, and APOR, among others. His research interests center around using new technology to capture data, which makes him the perfect fit here at Passenger. He is also joining me out of the LA office for today's webinar. Rick is a great colleague, and I hope that each of you have a chance to meet him in person as a client, or perhaps at an industry event such as the upcoming NGCX, where we will be on site, and we'd love for you to stop by and say hello. Our next guest has the lion's share of today's webinar, and she's prepared some really great information for everyone. So with that, I'd like to welcome Annette France, who is a customer with CX Journey. She has a passion for helping companies understand the importance of the employee experience and its role in developing an exceptional customer experience, as well as how to transform their cultures to ensure customers at the center of every conversation. She was recently recognized as one of the 100 most influential tech women on Twitter by Business Insider, and has been recognized by several organizations as a top influencer in customer experience. She is an active CXPA member, as a CX expert, CX mentor, and SoCal local networking team lead. She also serves on the board of directors. And if you can believe it, in between all of that, she serves as Director of Customer Outcomes with Fidelity Investments. So welcome, Annette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So a quick look at today's agenda before we pass it over to Annette. We'll first look at whose voices you should be listening to, then jump into the problem with current voice of customer programs, and then the 6 steps on how to turn data into action. Then I'll pass the ball over to Rick, who will talk about how online communities can help. We'll talk about conclusion, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Annette, and Annette, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again for having me as part of this webinar. I'm excited to talk about this topic, the biggest VOC problem today. I am not able to advance the slides right now, Brandon.
One second while we...
Awesome, now I got it. Great, thank you. Anyway, so I'm excited to talk about this topic today. Most people probably wouldn't be excited to talk about problems, but this is a real one with a real solution, so I'm happy to share a framework that will help you to solve this problem. And really, this framework is something just to get you started. Obviously doing the work is up to you. So let's get started. So what's the foundation for any customer experience transformation? And we might just be one slide ahead of ourselves here, but nope, we're going to come back here. Okay. It's data, right? We can't transform something we don't understand, and that data helps us to understand. We really want to understand our customers. We want to understand the experience that they're having, and we can't transform that without knowing what the current state of that experience is today. So I'm going to come back and talk about where that comes from in just a second, but I'm going to dive in with Pearson's Law first. Most customers, or most businesses, I'm sorry, definitely adhere to Pearson's Law, and if you don't know what that is, it states that which is measured improves, and that which is measured and reported improves exponentially. And we know that there's a lot of measuring going on, right? You know that every interaction that you have with a restaurant or a retail location or even your doctor's visit, you get a survey about the experience. So we know for a fact that companies are measuring, and that's a good thing. We hope that they're truly listening to what they're hearing. But are they really driving improvements with what they're hearing? What are they doing with the data? How are they using it? We're seeing a lot of research out there, and just from my personal experience in interacting with both clients and companies that I do business with, I think we know the answer, right? But according to some research from both Forrester and the Temkin Group, the findings are pretty dismal. You know, from Forrester, we heard that fewer than half of the companies that they surveyed draw action based on the VOC insights that they're getting. And Temkin's findings are actually a bit more daunting. He found that only 30% are making changes based on the insights they've gleaned. So it's a pretty sad situation right now to report this phenomenon. And I've been citing this particular statistic that's up on the screen right now for probably the last 10 years or so. And you might go, oh, well, that's old data. That's an old statistic. But the problem is that the story that they've uncovered really hasn't changed that much over the last 10 plus years. So let's take a look at something here to actually give you a little bit of proof of that. So if you're not familiar with the American Customer Satisfaction Index, this is, or the ACSI, that's what this is. It's some research that's done by both the University of Michigan and the ACSI. And we know that satisfaction really is just one measure or one way of looking at how well the experience is delivered. We know that it doesn't paint the whole picture. You know, companies look at likelihood to recommend, likelihood to purchase, customer effort, a lot of different things. But I think this is really a good proxy for what we're seeing and what we've seen over the last 20 years, right? So the ACSI is a weighted index of 3 survey questions about customer expectations, perceived quality, and perceived value. Again, a loose proxy for experience. So looking at these scores, obviously the experience has been measured, but it really hasn't improved at all, right? We look back at 1994 when the ACSI first began, and the score back then was 74.8. It dipped a little bit and then it went up a little bit, but look at where we are today. You know, the last measurement that they did was Q3 of 2015. Don't have the Q4 results yet, and then the score was 73.8. So that's a pretty good or pretty bad picture of where things stand today. So what gives, right? What gives? Why is this happening? And I think there are 2 things that really stand out, and 2 things that I think that are happening behind this. So the first one is that I think companies collect feedback, and when I say collect feedback, I put in air quotes around that, because, you know, we collect stamps too, right? So when we collect stamps, we put them in a book and we put the book on a shelf and we do nothing with them. And I think that's what companies are doing. They're collecting feedback. Somebody told them they needed to collect feedback, and that's what they're doing. Nobody ever said, hey, you got to listen to your customers, you got to act on what you're hearing, you got to do something with it. The other thing that I think is happening here too is that companies are focusing on the metric. They're not focusing on improving the experience, they're focusing on trying to move the number. And when we focus on moving the number and focus on the metric, it's actually pretty detrimental, and it causes, you know, inappropriate behaviors, gaming, and other what I'll call undesirables that really derail from the purpose of listening to customers. I don't know, guys, on the slide here. I think I missed something, got reordered. Hang on, let me just look here. Okay, something got reordered here. Okay, I'll come back to the other slide. So based on that, as a result, I think we need to modify Pearson's Law just a bit. I think he forgot one component of this law. You know, we measure and we report. The thing that's missing here in Pearson's Law is that we need to act on the findings. And if we don't act on the findings, really it's all for nothing. So let's talk a little bit about the problem. And the root of the problem really is the data. Yeah, data is a problem, and there's lots of it, right? It may not be the root, but it is the start of the problem. So companies are listening to all different constituencies that they have, right? There's lots of sources of data, there's lots of listening posts, there's structured data, there's unstructured, there's solicited, there's unsolicited, and that's coming from, you know, voice of the customer, voice of the employee, voice of the business, and those are things like your operational, financial, behavioral, transactional data. Voice of the market, which is typically, you know, like brand data or brand research and competitive data. Voice of the partner, voice of the future customer, or voice of the prospect. All of these constituencies are really important to listen to, but what you end up with is just a ton of data, volumes and volumes of data. It's a problem. It really is. And we were told to listen to our customers. We were told to listen to our constituencies. The problem is, again, nobody told us what to do with that, right? Maybe some know what to do with it, but others just can check a box and say, hey, you know what? I listen, and you know, and I can check that box. So the real problem with data is that data are just data until we do something with it, right? So I'm going to help you fix that. I'm going to take you through the 6 steps that I typically prescribe to turn data into insights, and then ultimately into a customer experience transformation. So the first thing we need to do is to centralize the data. Now, I know this is really a hefty undertaking, but this is the first thing you've got to do, and you cannot move to the other steps until you do this, right? You absolutely have to centralize the data. You can try to do all the other things, but you're going to fail because it's not going to be a cohesive effort across the organization. So you've really got to figure out how you're going to centralize all of your disparate data sources. Obviously, there are a couple of reasons to do this, again, because first of all, you can't get to my next step without doing that. But once you centralize the data, you're also better able to, for example, personalize the customer experience, customize the customer experience, reduce the customer effort through, you know, and simplify your omnichannel experiences. Those are some of the things that once you centralize all of your disparate data sources, it will, you know, those improvements will happen. Again, I know it's not an easy undertaking. I know your company's probably gone through acquisitions and mergers. You've got legacy systems, you've got legacy surveys, you've got legacy data, and there's data everywhere. But you really need to start. You've got to map the data, catalog it, figure out how you'll get it all into one place. And ultimately, really, that's the only way that you're going to be able to improve the customer experience. Because customer expectations are changing, right, everybody is looking for that personalization and that reduced effort. And so, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to centralize your data. And again, I know it's a hefty undertaking, and this is the biggest, most painful step of the 6 that I'm going to talk to you about, but this is where it begins. So the next step, once we've centralized the data, we're going to assume that's done now, is that we need to analyze it. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, right? And I'm just going to talk about a few. Not only do you want to do, for example, like a key driver analysis and use advanced analytics to prescribe solutions and to predict behaviors, you're also going to want to make sure that you mine your unstructured data. So you're going to want to make sure that you incorporate text analytics and sentiment analysis into your analytics toolbox. And don't forget, your analysis isn't just going to happen with your survey data. Data is going to come from other places, right? So unstructured data, for example, your comments, they're going to come from your survey, but they may also come from your call center scripts, or transcripts, I should say, the things that your customer service reps have logged into your CRM system about what's happening with your customers, about the feedback that customers gave. It might be, your account managers have been out talking to your customers and they've logged something into your CRM system. Just keep in mind that there are different sources of that unstructured data. A couple couple other types of analysis you want to do. Linkage analysis, I think this is really important. I think you're going to need to absolutely link your customer feedback to your operational and financial data, but you're also going to want to link that to your employee data and employee metrics. And I think it's key to remember that, you know, the employee experience drives the customer experience, and so that linkage there is going to be really important. And the third one that I'll just mention here is root cause analysis. I think that you need to do root cause analysis to really get to the heart of the matter and to really understand the why behind everything. And so you can't improve anything until you get to the root cause. Otherwise, it's going to keep happening over and over again. So root cause analysis is critical. So the next step we need to do is to synthesize or contextualize the data. So when we analyze the data, we really break it apart. And we try to better understanding of what's happening. But the data are really more useful for the end user when they're transformed into insights. So we want to put all the pieces of the analysis back together again to tell a story, to put that into context for those who need to act on it. Because storytelling is a great way to teach, and storytelling is a great way to help your audience easily understand what's expected of them and what you've learned and what's expected of them. So the story behind the data is often more easily digested than pure analytical output. And I'll have an example for you about this on the next slide. So once we've got our story, it's time to socialize it. And when we socialize it, really the aim is to get the insights back into the hands of the individuals who can actually do something with it. And you have to keep in mind that there are different audiences within your organization who need insights and the stories that are only relevant to them. And they need them real time in a format that drives both understanding and action. And that's appropriate for their role or their level. So think about the different levels within your organization. You've got your frontline staff, you've got your management staff, and you've got your executives, right? So each one of those are going to need to get the story in a way that they can easily digest it, and the pieces of the story that are relevant to them and to how they're going to use it. So I mentioned that I'd give you an example here. The example that I have is I worked with a client last year who did their key driver analysis and said, hey, we've got these 4 things that we know need to happen anytime that one of our customers goes through a customer support interaction. So they did their analysis, and they went to their, handed over the charts and the distributions and the percentages and all that lovely stuff, and said, make sure you do these 4 things anytime a customer calls us for support. But wouldn't it be a lot more impactful and a lot better understood if they had gone to their employees and said, okay, here's the story. Here, think about the the customer experience. Think about when the customer first calls to schedule that support or first calls about that issue, and take them through the story. Walk them through the customer's steps. Put them in the customer's shoes and insert those 4 key activities where and when it's relevant throughout that story, so that the employees can really understand what that experience ultimately looks like. Here's the big picture. Walk them through it, and they can call out those 4 key activities. So now they know where to incorporate those 4 things, and it's really a much more effective way to help employees understand, the experience that they're supposed to deliver. So now that we've got the findings in the hands of the people who need to do something with them, it's time for them to strategize, right? And that means that they need to come up with strategies and action plans for how to move forward based on what we now know. What are we going to do about it, right? How are we going to fix the things that we know that are going wrong, and how are we going to reduce customer effort? How are we going to improve the experience? And I just wanted to insert in here that you will likely have, or you may have, or hopefully will have in the future, a customer experience steering committee or some kind of cross-functional team with oversight that's going to make sure that these efforts don't, the ball doesn't get dropped on these efforts. If anybody's got any questions on that when we go into Q&A, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, but there definitely needs to be some sort of governance structure in place to ensure that, these things are taking place, and that, the next step in the process also gets done. So that takes me into number 6, which is really the last step, and that is we need to operationalize what we know now, right? And when we say operationalize, it really means that we're going to empower the people who need to use these stories and use this data with not only those insights, but the action plans to execute and put everything to good use. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? This is what it's all about. This is why we listen to our customers, and this is how we're going to make those improvements that transform the customer experience. So how do we solve the biggest VOC problem today? Action. Action is key. We can't take action when we have siloed data. So we've got to, just really quickly reiterate the steps that I just went through. We've got to bring that siloed data together into one centralized location. And the data can't just sit there and never get used. So we need to figure out what's available, pull it all together, and then make sense of it. I know it's going to take time, and you can use tools like data architecture maps, customer journey maps, feedback maps to help you figure out where all that data is and how you're going to be able to pull it all together. So once you've combined all those disparate sources, you're going to synthesize it and get it into the hands of the people who need to act on it. And then most importantly, I think you need to empower those people with the resources to get it done. And those resources are both financial and human, right? We can't just say, hey, this needs to get done, and we don't support them with the money and the people to actually do it. So the bottom line, transform your data into insights to transform the customer experience into one that's going to delight your customers. Okay, that was, I know that was short and sweet, and with that I'm going to turn it back over to Rick and the team at Passenger.
Hey Annette, this is Rick here. This has been really enlightening for me and I hope for the rest of our audience. I really appreciate the 6-step process to transform data, customer experience data into action. And I had a couple of questions I jotted down during the presentation that I hope you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And just real quickly, I feel like those 6 steps really make sense, right? Because I think some people just go, hey, we're gonna listen, we've got data, and now we're gonna fix it, right? But it's not that easy, right? And we realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, these questions are just before I jump into my portion of the presentation.
Okay.
But one of the things I jotted down was, so one of the characteristics that differentiate organizations that are able to collect data and carry it all the way through to the operationalization. How do they do that?
So I mentioned one of them, and I'll come back to that one because I want to like 3 things come top of mind here. I'll just say in no particular order except for the first one is absolutely critical. And that is these organizations have CEO and executive commitment to make this happen, right? So without the executive commitment, it's really hard for any sort of organization-wide transformations to happen. And when we talk about, the steps that I just went through, you really need the entire organization involved. This cannot happen in a silo. It cannot happen in just one department. So we really need to have the entire organization involved. And if we have CEO and executive commitment, a lot of times that means we might also have a chief customer officer involved, which is really nice. And if no CCO, then there's definitely going to be, a office of the customer / head of customer experience in place, and that's going to be really critical. And that's one of the fundamental pieces of how we move this forward and how these organizations are different. The second one that I want to mention is something that I did mention already, which is the customer experience steering committee or cross-functional team. Those are based on a governance structure, right? So you've got some sort of governance structure in place that includes the steering committee, and that governance structure ensures that everybody in the organization really knows their roles and responsibilities when it comes to both listening, to using this data, and to improving the customer experience. And then the third thing that I wanted to mention is culture. I think this is really key. The organizations are customer-focused and customer-centric, and they make all their decisions based on what's best for their customers. They understand their customers, both who they are, what their needs and desired outcomes are, and that culture drives other things, right? So it drives hiring decisions, for example, to make sure we hire the right people to deliver the experience that we want to. And I think that's key as well, because we have to remember that the employee experience drives the customer experience.
Yeah, totally. So just those three, I think you mentioned three things there: executive sponsorship, cross-functional team and governance, and then the culture.
Governance, yep. That's right.
Excellent. And
there are more, by the way, there are more, but I think those are sort of the fundamentals that have to be in place in order for the others to happen.
Sure. And then as far as like online customer communities, what role do you see communities play in improving customer experience overall?
So that's a really good question, and it's very relevant to my day-to-day role today. To me, communities are really, and I don't want to say just another customer listening post, but they are just another listening post, right? They're in some ways no different from surveys or any of the other ways that you listen to your customers. They're often built and managed with specific needs in mind, and there are two different types that I'm actually working with in my current role at Fidelity. One of them is a client advisory board. The one that I'm running is actually industry and geo-based, and so we get to listen to and interact with a very targeted set of customers and be able to ask them about very targeted experiences, right? The other one that I'm working on putting together right now is a virtual community, and it is role-based. So the members of this community all have a specific role within their client organizations. And in both of those scenarios, really what happens is we get to listen to customers, we get to learn from them, we get a better understanding of their unique needs and desired outcomes, and they get to hear from us about product and service concepts that are on our roadmap right now. They co-create, and there's benefits for them as well as for us. So that listening and actually diving in the trenches with them and co-creating with them is a great way to use communities to improve the customer experience, because they're basically telling us, what they want, and then we work on building it together. And just one thing that I wanted to just point out with communities that I've learned, and this is new for me. Prior to my role at Fidelity, I've never run a client advisory board or a virtual community before. And one of the things that I learned, and I think this is just a reiteration of how this is quote unquote just another listening post, is that, and this learning applies to communities as much as it does to surveys or any other way that you listen, is that the value or the success of these communities, I should say, lies in the value that's delivered to members as much as it is about the value that we receive. And I think that's something important to remember, again, going back to my presentation just now, is that the value that lies in your customers continuing to provide feedback and tell you what you're doing right and tell you what you're doing wrong is that you do something with that, right? And the more that you do something with that and let your customers know what you've done with it, the more that they're happy to provide feedback and make that continuous loop.
Fantastic. And I think that dovetails well with some of the points I'm going to talk about here in the next few minutes. So just real quick, an introduction to Passenger. So Passenger is an online community software provider. We purely build online communities. We've been doing it for about 10 years. And have offices both in LA and New York City. One of the interesting things is that we span a lot of industries and verticals. So anything from entertainment and media to retail to financial services, and we work with a number of the leading, world-leading brands across those categories. So we have a lot of experience building these customer communities to help improve customer experience outcomes, and we do that with our Fuel platform. Fuel is the name of our software product that we build communities on. It's a real-time agile solution that helps improve customer experience and conduct research. It's entirely mobile responsive, and in some cases you can have a mobile app that allows customers to engage with your brand in real time, anytime, anywhere. And it contains a number of tools, both quantitative and qualitative tools. You have the ability to author and deploy surveys. You have discussion boards, member-generated content, real-time live chat tools within the platform that allow you to get a full picture of the customer experience and interact with your core customers. One of the things you mentioned as well is the importance of reporting and dashboards and using text analytics and sentiment analysis. Those tools are also built into the platform and allow Community Manager to monitor consumer sentiment and community or customer health in real time too. So with Fuel, with our platform, you can kind of take data and so you're going to be able to collect voice of the customer data, so your community is always on. And one of the things that you mentioned as well is, I think, point 4 in your presentation was the need to socialize data. So you have the ability to easily share data with survey reports and dashboards, straight from the community. Of course, the need to make sense of that data. So we have the reporting tools that I just mentioned that go with sentiment analysis, text analytics, and survey reporting, opportunities as well. And point 4, I think, is especially important. And I think this is one of the things that differentiates, communities from other tools, is that when you're building a community, you're building a relationship with your customers. They're coming back, they're engaging with you over and over again. And so it's not just a point in time, it's not a transactional interaction, it's really building a relationship with your customers. And of course, you can use all these different tools and opportunities to improve overall customer experience. A little bit of storytelling here. So one of our clients is a leading hospitality brand, global presence, leading hotel brand, and they built a community for their core customers. And what the community has allowed them to do is to both ask questions about the customer experience through surveys, checking in with their customers on a regular basis, but it also allows them to organically surface problems that they wouldn't have otherwise detected. A community member can come in and say, hey, by the way, can be improved in this hotel by taking this action. And of course, these are the brand's core customers, the loyalty members, so they really want to interact with them at a high level and make sure that their needs are met. So two quick examples here. One is that the brand organically surfaced within the community the need to improve amenities at the hotel. So rather than going out improving the amenities and the products, the soap and the shampoo and all those things in parallel to the customer process, what they did is they interacted with customers. So their customers said, hey, we really like you to improve the amenities in your hotels, and the brand came back to the customers and said, great, we hear you, and we can help, you can help us do this. And they provided product feedback, they did product trials, and in turn improved the customer experience overall. So it led to a change in the product line and more happy, satisfied customers and a more loyal base. And of course, as their core loyalty members, this brand also wants to make sure that their customers are comfortable wherever in the world they may be. So they went through a process of designing a new hotel in conjunction with their customer base. They reached out to them. They said, these are our plans for building this hotel. What types of features should be included here? What should the design look like? Essentially, what's going to make your experience with our brand the best it can possibly be. And so by having this community available to them, they're able to interact with their customers ongoing through a variety of formats, whether it's these surveys, discussion boards, and focus groups that are conducting all within the Fuel platform to improve customer outcomes and customer experience overall. And of course, these are just two of the stories. that we could tell over, hundreds of different stories about how our customers and our partners are using the Fuel platform to improve customer experience overall. So with that, I'd like to turn the time back to Brandon, and we can go for some questions.
Great stuff. Thank you both very much. Very, very good. Okay, so as I mentioned, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box. We've had a few come in during the presentation, but if there are any more, we'll try and get to them in the next 7-8 minutes before we wrap up. The first question I think I'm going to throw your way, Rick, but Annette, after Rick has commented on it, if you have any follow-up, feel free to chime in as well.
Sure.
The question is, what do you see as the difference between community and CX tools?
I think that's a really good question. And I think, customer experience tools are obviously diverse. It's a multifaceted space. And, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that an online community is always on. You're forming a relationship with your customers, whereas some other tools and programs are more transactional. You're getting point-in-time feedback, whereas with your community, it's very relationship-based, and you're almost forced to close a feedback loop and show your customers in the community how you're making progress and improving their experience overall.
I would echo that sentiment, and as you were going through your case study there, I was thinking that too. The big difference, I think, is that there is an exchange, right? When we do surveys or we use some of these other ways to listen, it's oftentimes very much a one-way street. We may close the loop, I should say, with consumers or customers or respondents at the end of it all, but when you're managing a community, it's happening in real time, right? They give us feedback, we turn around and we say, well, what do you think about this, or how about that, or okay, we've taken what you just said and we've implemented, and here's what we've done, so now please react to this. It's very much a give and take and a sharing and a networking, and very much, like you said, relationship based. I can't reiterate that enough.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Okay, let's see, sorting through, how about what benefits do communities have over traditional focus groups? Do you want to take that one, Rick?
Sure. And I think this, pairs well with the previous question, is that, traditional focus groups, it's point in time, it's an activity or a project, whereas communities are going to be more an ongoing program. So the governance process that Annette mentioned that you would institute for CX experience and improving customer experience overall, your community is always on, and that governance is going to be there, whereas the focus groups are more single point in time, and you can certainly conduct focus groups within the community, but the community gives you more flexibility for a number of different project types, and it's that ongoing relationship. Annette, I don't know if you have anything to add to that as well.
No, I think you're spot on. I've moderated focus groups in my previous life, and I think you wrapped it up really nicely there.
Awesome. Thank you both. Okay, so here's a question regarding the day-to-day management of a community. The question is regarding, what is the percentage that you versus the client tend to have to manage? Rick, that's probably a good opportunity to talk about the flexibility and of Fuel. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So I think the question is, when you build a customer community, what percentage of labor falls on us versus what's going to fall over to a client? And so I'm going to go ahead and answer that question. And I think that with our professional services team and with our platform is really designed to be a self-service platform. So many of our partners operate the software on their own with extensive support and best practices for us. One of the things I'll mention is that we recognize the importance of this self-service segment because it gives brands the flexibility to run projects as they need them, to immediately take feedback and take it to the rest of their team. But we eat our own dog food. We built a customer community for our customers where they can provide ongoing feedback and we can learn from them as well.
That's great. Thanks, Rick. Annette, a question came through for you regarding what methods do you typically use to communicate to customers the results of their feedback? Do you want to?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So you know, they're as varied as the different media that are available to you, right? Typically, I have seen clients communicate these results back through emails, and they might be included in a newsletter, right? So if you're doing a marketing newsletter or you know, whatever newsletter that you're doing out to your, you know, campaigns that you're doing out to your customers on a regular basis, you can include it there. You can include it on your website. You can include it on your, you know, IVR or your voicemails, right? So we've heard your feedback and here's what we've done with it. So I've seen it, you know, again, as varied as the media is available to you, it's been done, so.
Great, thank you. Rick, we may have already kind of touched on this a little bit, but another question came through on the specific tools that are available in a community. Do you want to give a highlight on that or overview on that?
Yeah, so there are a number of different tools specifically available within, you know, Passenger's Fuel platform. At a high level, what they include are surveys, discussion boards, the ability to include like rich media, so videos, photos, you know, brand testing, those types of things, and text-based live chats that are often used for focus groups and in-depth interviews. In addition to that, we also have a number of reporting functions. So you're going to be able to pull survey data and share that with your stakeholders right from the platform. You also have text analytics and sentiment analysis built straight into the dashboards that are included in the platform.
Great, thank you. Okay, so another question came through. What do you mean by closing the feedback loop? Can you speak to that a little bit more? Do you want to tackle that one? Maybe, maybe Annette, if you also have thoughts on that as well, I'd love to get your opinion.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of different ways to do that, but go ahead, Rick, you start.
Yeah, no, I'm very interested in Annette's opinion as well. You know, like I mentioned before, when you're building an online customer community, you're building a relationship. And I don't think there's any relationship that can be sustainably built that doesn't include following up and sharing with you know, another party what progress you've made or what you've done. And so it's critically important for community managers and customer experience professionals to take the results from their community, and if they promise change, they need to go back to the customers and show them how they've made change based on their feedback. And really in that way that you can build a virtuous cycle of customer experience improvements where a customer provides feedback, you take that data, take that information, make changes, and then show the customer how you know, improved their experience. And then you know, what that results in is happier, more satisfied customers. But of course, Annette, very interested in your opinion as well.
Yeah, no, I will definitely echo what you said and just add a couple of things to it. In terms of closing the feedback loop, there are a couple of different constituencies that we want to close the loop with. First and foremost, we want to close the loop with the folks who have responded to the survey, and thank them for their feedback, follow up with any, you know, service recovery issues. So a lot of times people will incorporate alerts and case management into their survey systems so that they can close the loop immediately with those respondents who are having issues. So that's a way to close the feedback loop. There are bigger ways to come back and say, we've heard you, here's what we're doing with what we've heard, and then let everybody know what improvements are made. And to your point, to keep that continuous cycle going, that virtuous cycle going, because what ends up happening is when we listen to customers and we don't do anything with their feedback and we don't let them know what we've done with their feedback, is that they start to think, well, why am I wasting my time? Why should I provide feedback when they're not doing anything with it. And maybe you are doing something with it, you just haven't told your customers and they haven't seen the impact of it, right? Or they haven't felt the impact of it. And a lot of times it might take a year or two for some of the bigger improvements to be made. And so we just need to keep the customers in the loop on what's happening there. I think we also need to close the loop internally, and it's a different type of closing the loop. It's going back to your stakeholders and saying, here's what we've heard from our customers. And obviously you're going to be doing that because you're going to be sharing the data and the insights and everything with them. But we definitely want to close the loop internally as well and let the organization know how we're acting on and what we're doing with the feedback that we're hearing.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. So I promised that we would stick to about a 45-minute agenda. I think we're spot on with that. So if we didn't get a chance to get to your questions, we had a few that we were a little unclear about. We'll follow up with you individually with responses to those. But first, I wanted to say thank you to Rick, Annette. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much. Contact information is up on the screen. And then, as I mentioned, remember to stop by and visit us at the passenger booth at NGCX in Carlsbad later this month, March 21st, 22nd. We'd love to put a face to the names we have on here today. And then additionally, or perhaps alternatively, you can sign up for your very own trial of our fuel product by visiting www.fuelcycle.com or by reaching out to Rick. His email address is on the screen. So again, Rick, Annette, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
And we look forward to hosting you again on another webinar in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.